Well, welcome back, Key Stage 3, to part 2 of Lesson 4, where we are writing all about writers' aims, but this week linked to the themes in Lamb to the Slaughter. So in part 1, we talked a little bit about what theme is. We looked at a question which was all about the theme of gender, the roles of men and women. We looked at some quotes which could possibly link to gender in the story and what they show about it. And then I showed you my first paragraph of an answer about how gender is presented in the beginning of the story Lamb to the Saucer. So, just a quick reminder that by the end of today's lesson, by the end of part 3, you will have written 2 analytical paragraphs, one about the theme of gender and one about the theme of deception, both in the story Lamb to the Slaughter. So let's move along then with our work. So here is a reminder of the quotes all about gender from the beginning, the middle and the end of the story. So I've already written about this second one here. I chose that to write about in my first paragraph. So what we're going to do now is look at the second and the third paragraph. So I am going to be writing paragraph 2 about gender in the middle of the story. And at the same time, you're going to be writing paragraph 3 about gender at the end of the story. So this is very similar to the structure that you followed with Mr. Palmer last week. I'm going to do a bit of mine, you're going to do a bit of yours, I'm going to do the next bit of mine, and then you yours, and then etc. So hopefully this process should be reasonably familiar to you now. So, first thing I'd like you to do before we start is to choose your quote about gender in the end of Lamb to the Slaughter. So, given you a choice of 2 quotes that you could use here, and I just want to tell you a little bit more about them before we move on, before you choose one. So these were extension quotes from back in lesson 2. So maybe you had a go at thinking about these quotes. So well done if you did, but perhaps you didn't. So let's talk them through. So we've got Jack Noonan asked if she wouldn't rather go somewhere else, to her sister's house perhaps, or to his own wife's, who would take care of her. And Mr. Palmer was asking you in lesson 2, why is it interesting the people that Jack Noonan, the policeman, offers for Mary to go and be with and stay with at this time when she's very upset about the death of her husband? Well, hopefully you realise that both of the people that he suggests, Mary's sister and his wife, are both women. So that's interesting from the point of view of our gender question. So I guess why then does Jack suggest women? Well, I guess we could assume here that we're talking about the traditional role of women as the people who are caregivers. Traditionally, they were the people that stayed in the house, looked after the children. Again, we're talking about back in the 1950s and earlier. And here Jack is very much subscribing to this view that the people who can go and give Mary care are both women. So that tells us a little bit about the role of women there as caregivers. And then the second quote we've got, get the weapon and you've got the man. So again, this is Jack. And so why is this interesting? Who does he assume in this quote is the murderer of Patrick? Well, he assumes that it's going to be a man, which is interesting because it tells us again about the roles of men and women. It tells us that Jack expects only that it possibly could have been a man who did the killing. So men are the ones who are possible of kind of violence and deception, whereas women, it couldn't be a woman, they couldn't have done that. A woman can't lie, a woman can't be violent. So again, we've got some assumptions there, some probably outdated assumptions again, about men and women and the different things that they're capable of. So using what I've just told you then, have a think, which of these do you think you would rather write about? Which of these do you think you could find some interesting words in to talk about? Which of these do you feel like you understand more confidently and could write your paragraph about? So a bit of a chance to choose one now, pause the video, choose one and just note it down so that you've got it later for when you do your quotation section. Okay, so hopefully you've chosen one of those quotes that you're going to write about to help you talk about gender in the end of Lamb to the Slaughter. So we're going to break this down then. As I said, I'm going to write mine, you're going to write yours, and etc. So you're going to start with this statement. It's a clear and straightforward claim to show you've understood one particular thing about what the writer is showing to answer the question. And the rest of your analysis is going to prove this point. So this is the basis for your argument. This is what you're going to be arguing all the way through your paragraph. So remember, reminder that I'm writing mine about the middle, gender in the middle of the story. So here is my example statement. Towards the middle of the story, Dahl criticises how men were dominant over women in traditional roles of marriage. Towards the middle of the story, Dahl criticises how men were dominant over women in traditional roles of marriage. So if you're not quite sure what the word dominant means, it just means that they are in control and they are in charge. And that was kind of the view at this time, that it was the men who were in charge and not the women. So how would I break down my statement into its different components? Well, first thing you've got to do is state where in the story you're writing about. So I'm writing about the middle of the story. Then I have to clearly name the writer, and a reminder, as Mr. Palmer said last week, that we only ever refer to the writer either using their last name or using their full name, so Dahl or Roald Dahl in this case, and that's because this is a formal piece of writing, so that is normally how we would refer to them. And then the third thing that I have to do in my statement is make just one clear claim regarding what the writer is showing the reader in answer to the question. So the question is all about how gender is being shown in the story. Am I making a claim about that? Yes, men were dominant over women in traditional roles of marriage. So when I'm talking about gender, I will probably be using the keywords men and women in my statement. So that's a bit of a trick there to when you're writing your statement. It should probably have the word men and women in it somewhere. And remember, whenever you've written any part of your paragraph, to reread it, check it, make sure it makes sense as a whole. So let's do that. Towards the middle of the story, Dahl criticises how men were dominant over women in traditional roles of marriage. So yeah, I'm happy that makes sense. Let's just break that down a little bit further, just to clearly show you in colours. So here it is again. I've got which bit of the story I'm writing about. I've named the writer. And I've made one clear claim regarding what he's showing us, and making sure that clear claim answers the question. And then I've checked it. Right, so your turn now, KS3. So now you are having a go at writing a statement about how Dahl presents gender, so men and women, but at the end of the story. There's the three things here you've got to do to be successful. State which part of the story, so you're writing out at the end. State the name of the writer Dahl, and then make your one clear claim. And then obviously remembering to check it and read it through. If you get really stuck, I've put a few ideas here in the box at the bottom that you could put into your statement. These are not full statements, so you need to, if you want to use one of these ideas, you have to take them and put them into a statement sentence using the three parts here. So you can't just copy this down. You've got to put it into your statement if you want to use it. And of course you can do your own statement as well if you've got your own idea about how gender is shown at the end of the story. So pause the video here now. You're writing one sentence, your statement sentence, with the bit of the story you're writing about, the name of the writer, and your one clear claim about how gender is being shown. Right, folks, so hopefully you've got one statement sentence written down on your piece of paper. If so, then you're ready to move on to your quotation. So your quotation is your second sentence. It is a phrase or a group of words or a group of phrases from the story that help you work out the one thing that the writer is suggesting. And they've got to prove the statement that you've already written. So this is going to be evidence to back up what you've said. And remember, it needs embedding into a full sentence. You can't just put the quote. You've got to put it into a sentence, and you've got to explain what was happening in this bit of the story when you where you've taken this quote from. So reminder, I am writing about gender in the middle of the story. So here is my quote sentence. This is implied when Mary's husband Patrick gives her orders like sit down when he wants to speak to her. This is implied when Mary's husband Patrick gives her orders like sit down when he wants to speak to her. So what elements here have I included? Well, so I've started off with a clear sentence stem to show that I'm going to be providing evidence. I've chosen this is implied, but you could have this is implied, this is suggested, for example. All of those would work. I've taken my quote, and I've noticed how I've just taken 2 words out of the quote. I don't need to take the whole quote. I'm just taking the bit that I want. And I've embedded it into my sentence to kind of say what was being described at the time. It was Patrick giving her orders. And notice that I've also got quotation marks. And then around my quotation, I've explained what's happened just before or at the same time or just after to fully show that I understand where the quote came from and how it proves my statement. So I've got Mary's husband Patrick gives her orders when he wants to speak to her. And have I checked it through to make sure that it makes sense? This is implied when Mary's husband Patrick gives her orders like sit down when he wants to speak to her. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm happy that it flows as one sentence with my quote in it. So just a quickly look at how I break that down colour-wise. So far in my paragraph, I've got my statement. Towards the middle of the story, Dahl criticises how men were dominant over women in traditional roles of marriage. This is implied when Mary's husband Patrick gives her orders like sit down when he wants to speak to her. So in blue, I've got my sentence stem. In purple, I've got what's happening when this quote is said and who says it. And in green, I've embedded my quote into the sentence. And obviously, we did check before that it made sense. All right, so if you're feeling confident then, it's now time for you to write your quotation. So remember, you are writing about gender at the end of Lamb to the Slaughter. And you are starting with a clear sentence stem, you're embedding your quote in the sentence, and you're explaining what happened just before or at the same time or just after. Remember, you're choosing from one of these 2 quotes. I mean, obviously you can choose a separate quote if you want, but I probably suggest choosing one of these. And remember also that you don't have to use the whole quotation. Just take the words that you need as you want to embed them into your sentence. So, you know, this one particularly is very long, so I might just take sister's house and own wife out of that quote and put those into my sentence and embed them. If you want to do that, that's absolutely fine. And that's, in fact, what I'd recommend. So, pause the video now then. You are writing your quotation sentence. You're using a stem, you're embedding it in the sentence, and you're explaining what happens before, during, or after the quote is said. And you've got the quotes there to remind you. All right, folks, so hopefully you've got your quotation sentence now then about gender in the end of the story, and it proves your statement. Remember to double check it to make sure that it makes sense so far. When you've done that, it's time to move on to the 3rd section, which is inference. So inference is an explanation of what is hinted at or shown in the quotation that you've just given, and why this has led you to make the statement that you gave at the start of your paragraph. Reminder, I'm discussing how Dahl presents gender in the middle of the story, so here is my inference sentence. This suggests that Patrick is used to ordering Mary around and expects her to obey him without question. He does not say please or thank you to Mary, showing that he is in charge and has complete control in their relationship. And just again for you, this suggests that Patrick is used to ordering Mary around and expects her to obey him without question. He does not say please or thank you to Mary, showing that he is in charge and has complete control in their relationship. So what parts of my inference have I got? I've got a sentence starter, a sentence stem, like this suggests or this shows that I'm going to be talking about what I can infer from the text. I've explained what the quote suggests or makes me picture that Patrick is used to ordering Mary around and the fact that he expects her to obey him. That's what it makes me think of when I think of that quote. And then how I explain how this increases the reader's understanding of the theme and the statement, so gender here being the theme, remember, Yeah, I've explained some extra detail that I've noticed that he doesn't actually say please or thank you, and the inference there that I can make is that he feels he's fully in charge. Well, why would he need to say please when she will just do exactly what he asks him to do? And I've linked that back to my statement, remember, which was all about their relationship, him being dominant, the man being dominant. So I've linked that back in my sentence here. So let's just check it through and make sure it makes sense. So this suggests Patrick is used to ordering Mary around and expects her to obey him without question. He does not say please or thank you to Mary, showing that he is in charge and has complete control over their relationship. Yes, I'm happy that makes sense. So where does this fit into our paragraph so far? So I've got my statement and my quotation. Towards the middle of the story, Dahl criticises how men were dominant over women in traditional roles of marriage. This is implied when Mary's husband Patrick gives her orders like sit down when he wants to speak to her. This suggests that Patrick is used to ordering Mary around and expects her to obey him without question. He does not say please or thank you to Mary, showing that he is in charge and has complete control over their relationship. So my bit in blue is my sentence starter. My bit in green is what the quote makes me think or picture or suggests. And my bit in purple is how this actually links back to the theme and links back to my statement from earlier. And obviously before we checked it through to make sure it made sense. So your turn now to have a go at writing your inference. Remember, you are writing about gender at the end of the story. And this inference should explain the quotation sentence that you already wrote down a little bit earlier. Here are the 3 things you need to do. Use a sentence starter. Explain what the quotation that you already gave earlier in your paragraph suggests. And then how does that actually link back to this theme of gender? What is that actually showing us about men and women and their roles, and specifically in this story? Remember that inference is likely to be more than one sentence, or at least probably one long sentence with maybe a semicolon as well, where you could have put in a full stop to further explain your thinking. So this should be quite a longer section than probably the first 2 that you've written. So pause the video here to write your inference sentence. You're thinking about your quotation from the end of the text. What does it tell you about gender that backs up and supports your statement that you've already made? Right, well done if you've got to this stage and you now have an inference sentence written down on your paragraph. You are now ready to move on to connotations, as long as you have checked your sentence and made sure that it makes sense. So the final section of our analytical paragraphs is connotation. So this is when you pick out a particular word from your quote and explain how it reinforces or backs up the points that you've already made. Remember, I'm discussing gender in the middle of the story, so here is my connotation sentence. The imperative word sit has connotations of being an order, something that you would normally say to a dog. This reinforces that Patrick does not see Mary as equal to him, but almost as a pet, which he commands, or can command. Bit of a typo there, sorry. And the imperative word sit has connotations of being an order, something that you would normally say to a dog. This reinforces that Patrick does not see Mary as an equal to him, but almost as a pet, which he commands. So what have I got here? First of all, then I've chosen my word. Sit is the word that I've chosen from my quote. I've stated the word type. I've said it's a verb. And notice that I've also said it's an imperative verb. So I've been quite specific about what type of verb it is. An imperative verb is a verb that gives an order or a command. So if you can be specific about what type of word it is, as well as saying if it's a noun, adjective, verb or adverb, if you can also add some extra detail to that, that's even better. And I've got that in quotation marks. I've then explained the connotations. It has connotations of being an order, something you would normally say to a dog. That's what it makes me think, but that also links back to this whole idea of who's in charge of the relationship. So it links to my statement. And then I've explained what those connotations suggest about the theme of gender. It reinforces Patrick doesn't see Mary as equal. So again, this idea of men and women and not being seen as equal in their marriage and relationship. So let's check it through. The imperative verb sit has connotations of being in order, something you would normally say to a dog. This reinforces that Patrick does not see Mary as equal to him, but almost as a pet which he commands. Happy with that, although I did notice my typo earlier. So look, it makes sense to read through because even we as teachers can sometimes make mistakes, and we've spotted that by reading it through. Right, so let's see how that fits into my paragraph as a whole. So I've got my statement. Towards the middle of the story, Dahl criticises how men were dominant over women in traditional roles of marriage. Quotation, this is implied when Mary's husband Patrick gives her orders like sit down when he wants to speak to her. Inference, this suggests that Patrick is used to ordering Mary around and expects her to obey him without question. He does not say please or thank you to Mary, showing that he is in charge and has complete control of their relationship. And then my connotation, the imperative verb sit has connotations of being in order, something you would normally say to a dog. This reinforces that Patrick does not see Mary as equal to him, but almost as a pet which he commands. So I've picked out my words, I've said it's a verb, I've given its connotations that link back to the statement, and I've explained what this kind of tells me, linking to the idea of gender. And we had already checked it through as well. So, final bit of your paragraph to add here then, folks. You are now picking out a word from your quote which you put in your quotation section, and you are giving its word type and what its connotations suggest. Remember to put the word in quotes to state if it's a noun, adjective, verb or adverb, and then explain what the connotations are and then what this kind of tells you. A little bit of a tip here. Connotations could even suggest something new you haven't discussed before, as long as you're making sure it always links back to that statement and that question. So you're always saying something about men and women, and you're always linking back to that thing that you wrote in the very first sentence, because your whole paragraph should be building on that and creating an argument to support it. So pause the video now to write your connotation sentence or sentences. Okay, and then final thing, remember to check it to make sure it makes sense. So hopefully then, folks, you've ended up with something a little bit like this. So here is my paragraph about the middle of the story where I've put all of my sections together. If I was going to highlight it to show where are my statement, where's my quotation, where's my inference, where's my connotation, it would look something a bit like this. So your job now is to do the same thing on yours, please. So to self-assess your paragraph, I would like you to highlight or label where is your statement, the bit that your kind of key thing that you're arguing. Where is your quotation, your evidence that you've embedded into a sentence? Where is your inference, where you've explained what that quotation shows and how it supports your argument? And then where are your connotations, where you've picked out one word and talked about why it's been used and again how that supports your argument. So pause the video here, you have some time to self-assess. Okay, year 7, year 8, you should have a beautifully highlighted or labelled paragraph now, and if that is the case, that is the end of part 2 of the lesson. So come back and join me in part 3 where you're going to be writing your second paragraph for today, which is going to be on a different theme in the story. So until then, take care.